Welcome back to America's Commercial Real Estate Show. I'm Michael Ball. The segment is brought to you by CommercialAgentSuccess.com. Check it out for commercial real estate broker training. Today we're getting the Fed's view on commercial real estate. We have Brian Bailey here with us in Studio One. He's the subject matter expert on commercial real estate for the Atlanta Fed. And Brian, I'd like to get your view on some of the sectors, what's hot, what's not. I guess everything's sort of hot, I guess. Well, maybe some people think retail's not hot, but what is your outlook for some of the various sectors? And if you don't mind, since I mentioned retail, let's start there.
Right. I think retail, tale of two cities. There's certainly a significant amount of retail that hasn't, felt the change in the in e-commerce. So it's been business as usual. At the same point, the rate of change is accelerating, and if you look at consumer switching costs, they're probably the lowest in the retail dynamic. I mean, you can choose to go to your drugstore or your grocery store or a supercenter. I mean, you can go wherever and just make that change, basically in the 2 minutes or 5 minutes, or in the case of Atlanta, the 20 minutes that you're in the car. So that rate of change is accelerating faster, and we're seeing that dynamic impacting certain types of retail property. Mm-hmm. So in some respects, I think that there's been a lot of energy in the press, maybe a little bit more than is warranted, but certainly a lot of retailers have been going bankrupt. And the rate of retailer bankruptcies has been at a rate that we saw in 2010. So and you contrast the economies with 10% unemployment versus 3.7 today. So night and day as far as the economies are concerned, but certainly the dynamics continue to shift. I think but at the same point, I think it creates opportunity. I think there's a real opportunity in retail right now to take some of those struggling properties and potentially, re-tenant them, change the mix, and probably going to something that, more suits the consumer base. I mean, you think about it, we're aging, and so there's more opportunity in retail if you insert healthcare providers. Yeah. And that's really created a positive dynamic. I think if you look, warehousing, certainly we continue to race to develop that last mile capability. It's in my view, in a growth phase. At some point it comes out of the growth phase and it matures, and then all of a sudden we have consolidation. But for today, it's growing fast, and we continue to absorb almost all of the all the warehousing that's being built, which certainly is good news considering that we're building, astronomical amounts right now.
And let me get your view more on retail a little bit, right? Because I agree with you. I think retail has a lot of opportunities, and we're seeing a lot of retail property sell that we move around the Southeast, and a lot of internet resistant type of tenants and experienced tenants. But let's be devil's advocate here for a moment. You just talked about how record low unemployment, big consumer confidence, right? We're starting to see wage growth so that I guess that's pretty good times, right? People's home values are going up, the stock market's doing well. So you would think that retail should really be booming right now, and I guess in a lot of places it is. But what does that mean for retail if we do have a downturn in the economy?
You're asking me to get my crystal ball out. Oh, that's scary. Yeah. That's scary.
Yeah. I mean, you think about it. We could be doing the Snoopy dance right now as far as consumers having money and spending it, and right.
So I think the consumer is by and far in a better place than they were a number of years ago. At the same point, the rate of change is evolving faster, and the one thing we have to kind of add a new buzzword to our vocabulary. We've focused on overbuilding, and we're very I think we're pretty adept at saying, hey, we see a bunch of cranes in the air, and this is potentially more risk. But at the same point, technology is allowing us to use real estate more efficiently. And so I think efficiency is going to be a pretty significant dynamic going forward. And so I think that right now, you see the e-commerce providers are in some ways able to provide the consumer what they want. They want home delivery. They want it, fairly modestly priced. And so, the e-commerce folks have identified that and are able to fulfill that. At the same point, you look at malls. Mall is a magnet for traffic, and if the same or less folks are going to the mall, then that's less opportunities for the folks not only in the mall but in the retail on the periphery to make sales. I wonder at some point, does that same dynamic begin to move and make itself apparent in grocery-anchored retail? I mean, you think about it, a smaller model, but similar, and do the inline spaces begin to have less opportunities because there's less traffic? Seeing a little bit of that dynamic beginning to play out, but certainly, food has been, because of the perishability dynamic, has been a very tough industry to crack for the e-commerce folks. But you see a lot of energy behind it right now.
Yeah. Well, I agree. I think I love retail, and I think it's usually really good at real estate. I love the change in use and aspects of it, and even building other types of properties on these retail. The multifamily and hotels and things like that. And you mentioned efficiency of using commercial real estate. It's more and more important. So let's get your view on the office market. There's certainly been a lot of talk about efficiency there and companies using less space. And what do you guys think about office?
Kind of mixed bag right now. I think that from 1984 to today, the density per worker has come down from roughly 250 feet to about 210 square feet per worker. So certainly you've seen that dynamic come down. You see some of the tech companies, and their footprint is about 100 square feet per worker. I talked to an architect in Miami, and he said he was doing some planning for 46 square feet per worker. And I'm like, wow, that kind of opened my eyes a little bit. That may be
like you're on an airplane.
Yeah, right. Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah.
But maybe, and there are some indications that maybe that pendulum has swung too far. And needs to begin to swing back a little bit to find kind of the balance, because as you get, very high dense, there are some studies that are showing that there are some losses in productivity. So we need to maybe find the balance a little bit. We see maybe that pendulum beginning to swing back a little bit. I think, CBD office, has run very well because we've had an influx of folks down into the urban core. Suburban has languished a little bit up until the last, year or so, basically. And all of a sudden, I think that there's been some life in the suburban space. And I think part of that is, we're starting to see the millennials, and maybe they aren't, permanently attached to the urban core. And they're willing to move back to the burbs a little bit. So I think that, there is some dynamics that is positive in the suburban space. And I think the CBD office space, will continue to do well.
Yeah, I do too. And let me ask you about, you mentioned efficiency, and part of efficiency of using commercial real estate is also flexibility. So whether it's retail, somewhat we're seeing in that, especially because of FASB lease accounting, potentially having tenants that want shorter leases, but certainly in office, we're seeing flexibility be a big deal for tenants, with the WeWork type of thing and shorter leases. So, when we go to lenders and we show these short-term tenants that, maybe Bill can have a very good history, but they look at the leases like, wow, you don't have a lease over 3 years here. Yeah, well, is that a box that is hard to uncheck for banks when they have these short leases because these tenants want flexibility?
Right. And it's a good question. Certainly I can't speak for all banks because the risk profile is different across the spectrum. Sure. Certainly I think that, the traditional mindset has been, the longer term lease we have, the more safety there is in that. Yeah. Now, it is interesting to me with, some of the co-working dynamics because, it's done phenomenally well in in the part of the cycle that's been on the upturn. So kind of, a rising tide may float all boats, though the market has given it significant credence. But the leases are very short, and then the lease between the co-working firm and the landlord, tends to be structured with a letter of credit that burns off pretty quickly. So in my view, it seems like there's the potential for, the co-working firm to lose a lot of tenants pretty quickly since their leases are shorter duration. And then because that letter of credit burns off, the potential for the landlord to get that space back from the co-working firm pretty quickly. So, really it's a dynamic that's done phenomenally well on the upside, but not really tested on the downside in a down economy. So, I have some questions about, how does that work? But yes, I think that, the banks are better off with, longer term leases. I understand flexibility is certainly a dynamic that is wanted in the marketplace. At the same point, tenant TI is incredibly expensive right now. The other thing, kind of balancing that out, is move costs. Move costs are incredibly expensive as well.
Construction costs.
Yeah, absolutely. Yes.
To build out these spaces, right? Mm-hmm. Well, I think it's kind of interesting dynamic if the FASB lease accountings, which causes tenants to have to put these leases on their balance sheet, and if that tends to make some of these tenants want to have shorter leases. And then you have this flexibility where some of these tenants may want shorter leases anyway. Because of that, like I've sold 3 office buildings recently that had a lot of these types of tenants. Buildings had a lot of history, but one of the challenges, up front was, hey, this isn't going to check a box of some long-term leases. And I think we potentially, because of all these factors combined, see more of that. And I think, are the banks can they get comfortable with that somehow if it's the new dynamic?
Well, I think taking a step back, but certainly from an acquisition or purchase perspective, certainly harder to do the underwriting when you have shorter leases. Yeah. Not to mention the banks, which have underwriting that they have to do as well. Yeah. So I think it's definitely a dynamic that will continue to play out, but certainly there's going to be a struggle in getting our arms around how to properly underwrite that, whether it's the marketplace or whether it's the banking environment.
Right. All right, we're going to take a short break, and when we get back, we're going to ask Brian about the future. Have to look into his crystal ball, right, and tell us what he feels about the future moving forward. So stay with us. I'm Michael Bull. This is America's Commercial Real Estate Show.